Okay, so today we're diving headfirst into something that's been making waves, and that's decentralized finance, better known as DeFi.
DeFi.
It's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot these days, but what's the reality behind it? What's all the hype about?
Yeah, it can be a bit of a jungle out there trying to figure out what's really going on.
Exactly.
So we're going to try and break it down for you today, and we've got some really great sources to help us do just that.
Right.
We're looking at in-depth reports from the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, those guys.
The BIS, yeah.
And also from Fraunhofer FIT, who've done some fantastic work in this space.
Yeah, they really have.
And we're also going to tap into some cutting-edge research on zero-knowledge proofs, and for that we're turning to Protocol Labs.
Protocol Labs, the ZK experts.
Exactly.
So we've got a lot of ground to cover. But one thing that really jumped out at me, from Fraunhofer FET in particular, was just how quickly this whole DeFi thing is growing.
Oh, yeah. It's been explosive.
Explosive is the word.
They pointed out that the total value locked in DeFi on Ethereum, it's kind of like a measure of how much money is sloshing around in the system, went from under $20 billion in January 2020.
Yeah, that's not a small number to begin with.
No, not at all.
That
to over $160 billion by early 2022.
That's an incredible jump.
It is. And, it really signals that DeFi is becoming a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely not a fringe thing anymore.
No, it's becoming mainstream.
But then you've got the BIS. They're coming in with kind of like a word of caution, right? They talk about this decentralization illusion.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting point.
So they're saying, well, maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be in terms of, this idea of a level playing field, this kind of like, power to the people thing.
Yeah, they're suggesting that the way DeFi is structured, especially when it comes to things like governance, how decisions are made.
Who's in control?
Exactly, who has the power, it can actually lead to a concentration of power.
So it's like, maybe we're just recreating the old systems in a new digital guise.
It's a possibility, and that's what we really want to explore today.
Yeah, let's get to the bottom of this.
Peel back the layers.
Exactly.
So, to really understand DeFi, we need to start with the fundamental tech.
Right, the building blocks.
So what is it that makes all of this possible?
Lay it on us.
Okay, so it all starts with distributed ledger technology, or DLT for short.
DLT. Okay.
And more specifically, we're talking about blockchains.
Blockchains, everyone's heard of blockchains, but what are they really?
Right. So Fraunhofer FIT, they describe it as kind of like a shared digital record book.
Okay.
But unlike a traditional record book that sits in one place, this one's spread across a whole network of computers.
Distributed, right. That's where the distributed part comes in.
Exactly. It's distributed.
Okay.
And transactions, any kind of activity that happens in the system, they get grouped into these things called blocks.
Blocks, right?
And those blocks are linked together using cryptography, which is essentially like really strong digital locks.
Super secure.
Very secure. It makes it extremely difficult for anyone to tamper with the history of transactions.
Okay. So it's tamper-proof, basically.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes.
Okay, so it's like a history book that you can't rewrite.
Exactly. And what's really important here is that this record is usually transparent.
Transparent, so everyone can see what's going on.
Yeah, anyone can look into the system and verify what's been recorded.
Okay, so that's kind of like a public audit trail.
Exactly, a public audit trail.
Okay, interesting.
And that's a key difference from traditional financial systems where that information's often kept behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's like, the banks have their ledgers, and we just have to trust that they're doing things right.
Right, exactly.
Now, both the BIS and Fraunhofer FIT, they talk about how these blocks actually get added to the chain. And they mention these things called consensus mechanisms.
Consensus mechanisms, yeah, that's how the network agrees on what's true. And there are different ways of doing this.
Right.
So we've got proof of work, which is what Bitcoin used, and early Ethereum as well.
Okay, proof of work.
And then we've got proof of stake, which is becoming increasingly popular.
So what's the difference between those two?
Okay, so proof of work, as the BIS points out, it requires a lot of computational power.
Okay, so it's a really energy-intensive process.
It can be, yeah.
So what's happening there?
It's kind of like solving a really complex puzzle.
Okay.
And the computers on the network, they're all competing to solve this puzzle.
So it's like a race to see who can crunch the numbers the fastest.
Yeah, exactly. And the first one to solve it gets to add the next block to the chain.
And they get rewarded for that, right?
They do. They get rewarded with some of the cryptocurrency.
Okay, so that's the incentive to participate.
Exactly.
And then you've got proof of stake.
Right. So proof of stake, it's a bit different.
Okay.
It's more about having a stake in this system.
So it's like, if you own a share of a company, You have a say in how it's run.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Okay.
So people who hold a certain amount of the cryptocurrency, they can stake it.
They lock it up, basically.
Yeah, they lock it up.
Okay.
And then they're chosen, based on how much they've staked, to validate new transactions.
So the more you stake, the more likely you are to be chosen.
Exactly. And it's seen as a more energy-efficient way of doing things.
Okay, so it's kind of like a greener approach.
It is, yeah. And it also has the potential to be faster.
Okay, so faster, more efficient, less energy intensive.
Yeah, those are the main benefits.
Sounds good.
Now, another term that you hear a lot in the DeFi space is smart contracts.
Smart contracts. Yeah, what are those all about?
So imagine a contract that can execute itself automatically.
Okay, so it's not just a piece of paper that you sign.
No, it's not. It's a piece of code
Okay.
that lives on the blockchain.
Right.
And it automatically enforces the terms of an agreement.
Okay, so how does it know when to do that?
Right. So it has these predefined conditions written into it.
Okay.
And when those conditions are met, the contract executes itself.
So it's like a set of if this, then that statements.
Exactly. If this happens, then this happens.
Right.
And this automation, that's what really enables all these cool DeFi applications.
So it's like the engine that drives everything.
It is, yeah. And both the BIS and Fraunhofer FT, they point out that Ethereum has become the main platform for these smart contracts.
Ethereum, right? The big one.
Yeah, it's kind of like the operating system for a lot of DeFi apps.
So it's like the foundation on which everything else is built.
Exactly.
So that's pretty crucial then.
It is, yeah.
Now, the other thing we keep hearing about is this idea of trustless execution.
Right. So with smart contracts, you don't need to trust a central authority to make sure everyone follows through on their promises.
Yeah, because traditionally it's like you need a bank or a lawyer or somebody to kind of like be the intermediary, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you need someone to enforce the rules.
But with DeFi, it sounds like the code itself is the enforcer.
Precisely. The trust shifts from institutions to the reliability of the code.
Okay, so it's all about the code.
Yeah. If the code's good, the system works.
Interesting.
And then we have tokens.
Tokens, right. These are like the digital assets that are moving around in this DeFi world.
Exactly. They're the lifeblood of the system.
Okay, so there are different types of tokens, right? We've got fungible and non-fungible, for starters.
Yeah, those are the main two.
So what's the difference between those?
Okay, so fungible tokens, they're like regular currency.
Okay.
One unit is interchangeable with another.
Like a dollar bill, $1 bill is the same as any other dollar bill.
Exactly, yeah. So think of ERC20 tokens on Ethereum.
ERC20, that's a standard, right?
It is. It's a standard for creating fungible tokens on Ethereum.
Okay.
And then you've got non-fungible tokens, or NFTs.
NFT, everyone's talking about NFTs these days.
I know, right?
So what makes them different?
NFTs are unique.
Okay.
They represent ownership of something specific.
So it could be a digital asset, like a piece of digital art, or it could even be something physical.
It could be, yeah, like a deed to a house.
Okay, wow.
And there are different standards for creating NFTs, like ERC 721.
ERC 721.
Okay, and then you've got more advanced standards like ERC 1155, which can handle both fungible and non-fungible assets within a single contract.
So that's like a hybrid?
It is, yeah. It's like a Swiss Army knife of tokens.
Interesting.
And these tokens, they can represent all sorts of things.
Right, like what? Give us some examples.
So you can have a token that represents a digital dollar.
Okay, like a stablecoin.
Exactly, a stablecoin.
Or it could be a share in a project.
Yeah, like a security token.
Okay.
Or it could even be voting rights in a decentralized organization.
Wow, so it's like, it's not just about money, it's about control, it's about ownership.
It is, yeah. It's about all of those things.
So we've got the blockchain as a foundation, we've got smart contracts as the rules, and we've got tokens as the assets.
Right. Those are the three key ingredients.
So how does it all fit together? Fraunhofer IFT mentions this DeFi stack.
Yeah, the DeFi stack, it's a way of visualizing how all the different pieces work together.
Okay, break it down for us.
So at the bottom, you've got the settlement layer,
Okay.
which is the blockchain itself.
Right, the foundation.
Exactly. It's like the bedrock.
Okay.
And that layer, it handles things like managing accounts and processing transactions.
So it's like the plumbing of the system.
It is, yeah. It's what makes everything flow.
And then on top of that, we've got the asset layer.
Right. The asset layer, that's where all the different digital assets live.
So that's where the tokens are.
Exactly. All the
Okay.
tokens, both the ones that are native to the blockchain.
Like Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Exactly.
And then you've got tokenized versions of other assets.
Yeah, so you can have a token that represents gold, for example.
Okay, so you can bring real-world assets into this digital space.
You can, yeah. That's one of the really cool things about it. And then on top of the asset layer, you've got the protocol layer.
The protocol layer, okay.
And this layer, it's made up of the smart contract protocols that govern specific DeFi applications.
So that's where the rules of the game are set.
Exactly. So you might have a protocol for lending
Okay.
or a protocol for trading.
Or for insurance?
Yeah, exactly. All sorts of things.
Okay.
And then on top of the protocol layer, you've got the application layer.
So this is where things start to get real for the users.
It is, yeah. This is where people actually interact with DeFi.
Oh.
And they do that through decentralized applications, or dApps.
dApps.
And these dApps, they provide specific financial services.
So you might have a dApp for lending or a dApp for trading.
Exactly, yeah, just like with the protocols.
Okay.
And then finally, at the very top of the stack, you've got the aggregation layer.
So this is like the cherry on top.
It is, yeah. It's the layer that brings everything together.
Okay.
And this layer, it consists of platforms that pull together all the different DeFi services.
So it's like a one-stop shop for all your DeFi needs.
Exactly, yeah. You can go to one of these platforms and you can access all the different protocols and dApps.
Okay, so it's like the App Store for DeFi.
It is, yeah. That's a good analogy.
So we've got the whole stack laid out now, from the foundation to the user interface.
Right, we've got the big picture.
So now let's zoom in on some of the specific areas where DeFi is being used.
Okay, sounds good.
And one area that's been getting a lot of attention lately is stablecoins.
Stablecoins, yeah, they're a big deal.
The BIS report goes into a lot of detail on stablecoins.
They do. They see them as a potentially really important part of the future of finance.
So what are stablecoins, and why are they so important?
Okay, so stablecoins, as the name suggests, they're designed to maintain a stable value.
So unlike other cryptocurrencies, which can be very volatile.
Exactly. Yeah, Bitcoin, for example, it can go up and down like a roller coaster.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart.
No, not at all.
So stablecoins are trying to be more like traditional currencies.
They are, yeah. They're trying to be more like the dollar or the euro. And they do this by pegging their value to another asset.
So it could be a fiat currency, like the US dollar.
It could be, yeah, that's the most common type of stablecoin.
Okay.
But it could also be something else, like gold.
Okay, so you're basically creating a digital version of a real-world asset.
Exactly, that's the idea.
And the BIS, they're saying that stablecoins have seen incredible growth recently.
They have, yeah, it's been phenomenal.
They mentioned that by late 2021, the total value of the major stablecoins was around $120 billion.
Yeah, that's a huge number.
That's massive.
And it shows that people are really starting to take them seriously.
Yeah, they're not just a niche thing anymore.
No, they're becoming mainstream.
And Fraunhofer FIT, they give some examples of popular stablecoins, right?
They do, yeah. So we've got Tether, which is USDT.
USDT? Okay.
And then there's USD Coin, which is USDC.
USDC, right?
And then there's DAI.
DAI, okay.
And BUSD.
BUSD, so there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, there are a lot of different stablecoins out there.
And each one has its own way of maintaining its stability.
Exactly. Yeah, they use different mechanisms.
Okay.
Some are backed by actual fiat currency held in reserve.
So they're like literally backed one-to-one by dollars in a bank account somewhere.
Yeah, that's the idea.
And then others, they use more algorithmic approaches.
Yeah, so they might adjust the supply of the stablecoin based on market demand.
Okay, so it's a bit more complex.
It is, yeah, but the goal is always the same, to keep the price stable.
So the BIS, they're saying that stablecoins could be used for more than just trading other cryptocurrencies, right?
Yeah, that's right. They see a lot of potential for them in other areas.
Like what?
So they could be used for things like e-commerce.
Okay, so buying things online.
Exactly, yeah.
Or peer-to-peer payments.
Yeah, sending money to friends and family.
And they also talk about how stablecoins could be embedded into other blockchain-based applications.
Yeah, that's right. They could be used to power the economies of these new decentralized systems.
So it's like bringing the stability of traditional currencies into the crypto world.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
And that could open up a whole lot of new possibilities.
It could, yeah. It's a really exciting area.
Now, another area that we hear a lot about in DeFi is decentralized exchanges, or DXs.
DEXs, yeah, they're a big part of the ecosystem.
So what are DXs and how do they work?
Okay, so DXs, they allow people to trade cryptocurrencies directly with each other.
So it's like peer-to-peer trading.
Exactly, yeah, there's no central intermediary.
So unlike a traditional exchange where you have to go through a broker.
Right, yeah. On a DX, you're trading directly with another person.
Okay.
And a lot of DXs, they use these things called automated market maker protocols, or AMMs.
AMMs. Okay, what are those?
So the BIS report, they give a good example with this thing called the constant product function.
The constant product function. Okay.
So imagine you have a pool of two assets.
Okay, so like let's say Tether and Ether.
Yeah, perfect example.
Okay.
So you have a pool of Tether and Ether.
And people can trade between those two assets.
Exactly.
Yeah, so how does the price get determined?
So the price is determined by the ratio of the two assets in the pool.
Okay.
So if you buy Ether, you're essentially decreasing the amount of Ether in the pool.
Right, because you're taking some out.
Exactly, and you're increasing the amount of Tether in the pool.
Because you're putting some in.
Right. And that shifts the ratio.
Okay.
And that makes Ether slightly more expensive in that pool.
So the more people buy Ether, the higher the price goes.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about supply and demand.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
And the cool thing about this is that it's all done automatically.
Right. There's no central authority setting the price.
Exactly. It's all determined by the algorithm.
Okay, that's pretty neat.
And the people who provide the assets for these pools, they're called liquidity providers.
Liquidity providers. Okay.
So they deposit their crypto assets into these pools.
And why would they do that?
So in return for providing liquidity, they earn a portion of the trading fees.
Okay, so they get paid for helping to make the market work.
Exactly, yeah. They're incentivized to provide liquidity.
But Fraunhofer FET, they also mentioned a risk for liquidity providers, right? Something called impermanent loss.
Yeah, impermanent loss, that's a bit of a tricky one.
So what is it?
So it can happen when the price of one of the assets in the pool changes significantly.
Okay.
So let's say you're providing liquidity to a pool of Tether and Ether.
Right, our favorite example.
And the price of Ether goes up a lot.
Okay.
You're going to end up with more Tether and less Ether in your pool.
Because people are buying up all the Ether.
Exactly. And that can result in a loss compared to if you had just held on to your Ether.
So it's like the opportunity cost of providing liquidity.
It is, yeah. It's something that liquidity providers need to be aware of.
Okay, so there's a trade-off there.
There is, yeah.
Now, another big area in DeFi is lending and borrowing.
Lending and borrowing, yeah, that's a huge part of traditional finance.
And it's becoming a big part of DeFi as well.
It is, yeah. In the BIS report, they talk about this thing called over-collateralization.
Over-collateralization, what does that mean?
So in DeFi, because you're often dealing with anonymous or pseudonymous participants.
Right, you don't know who you're lending to.
Exactly. And because crypto assets can be so volatile.
Right, they can go up and down in value very quickly.
Yeah. So to protect themselves, lenders typically require borrowers to put up collateral.
Collateral, yeah.
And that collateral, it needs to be worth more than the amount they're borrowing.
So you need to have more to borrow less.
Exactly. Yeah, that's over-collateralization.
Okay.
And the reason for this is if the value of the collateral drops too much.
The lender can seize it?
Exactly. They can liquidate it.
Okay.
And that protects them from losses.
Okay, so it's a way of mitigating risk.
It is, yeah. It's a very common mechanism in DeFi.
But the BIS, they also mentioned that there are some newer forms of unsecured lending emerging.
Yeah, unsecured lending. That's interesting.
So how does that work?
So these are still pretty early stage, but they often involve entities or individuals with established reputations.
So people who are known and trusted.
Exactly.
And they can essentially vouch for borrowers.
Yeah, they can act as guarantors.
And that makes traditional collateral less necessary.
Right, because the lender is relying on the reputation of the guarantor.
Okay, interesting.
And the BIS, they call this credit delegation.
Credit delegation.
So it's kind of like a hybrid between traditional lending and DeFi lending.
Okay, so it's like bringing some of the elements of the old system into the new system.
Exactly, yeah, it's an interesting development.
Now, the BIS also talks about these things called flash loans.
Flash loans, yeah, those are pretty wild.
They sound almost too good to be true.
They do, yeah, they're like something out of a science fiction movie.
So what are flash loans and how do they work?
Okay, so a flash loan, it allows you to borrow a large amount of cryptocurrency.
Okay.
But there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
You have to repay the loan within the same transaction block.
So that's like within seconds, right?
Yeah, it's extremely short term.
So how is that even possible?
So it's all done on the blockchain.
Okay.
And it's all done automatically.
Yeah.
So you borrow the money, you execute a series of trades.
Okay, so you're using the borrowed money to make other trades.
Exactly. And then you repay the loan.
All within the same transaction block?
Yes, all within the same block.
Wow.
And if you don't repay the loan...
The whole thing gets reversed.
Exactly. The transaction is invalidated.
So it's like it never happened.
It's like it never happened.
Wow, that's incredible.
So in that very narrow window, it's essentially risk-free for the borrower.
Okay, That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, yeah. It's a really powerful tool.
But it sounds like it's mainly used by very sophisticated traders.
Yes, not for beginners.
Okay, so we've talked about stablecoins, we've talked about DXs, we've talked about lending and borrowing. What other areas is DeFi reaching into?
So Fraunhofer FIT, they mentioned derivatives and asset management.
Derivatives and asset management? Okay, those are pretty big areas in traditional finance.
They are, yeah, and they're starting to make their way into DeFi as well.
So how are those working out?
So derivatives, they're basically contracts that derive their value from the price of an underlying asset.
Okay, so it's like betting on the price of something.
Yeah, it can be like that.
Okay.
And there are different types of derivatives, like futures, options, swaps.
Right, a whole world of complex financial instruments.
It is, yeah. And DeFi platforms, they're starting to offer some of these.
So Fraunhofer FIT, they mentioned DYDX as an example of a platform that offers leveraged trading.
Leverage trading, yeah, that's where you borrow money to amplify your gains.
Or your losses.
Or your losses, exactly. It's a high risk, high reward kind of thing.
Okay.
And they also mentioned synthetics.
Synthetics.
Which is a platform that allows you to create and trade derivatives that track the prices of various assets.
So you could have a derivative that tracks the price of gold, for example.
Exactly.
And then you've got asset management.
Asset management, yeah, that's a big one.
So how is that working out in DeFi?
So we're seeing these things called yield farming protocol.
Yield farming, that sounds interesting.
It is, yeah. It's kind of like automated portfolio management.
Okay.
So users, they deposit their crypto assets into these vaults.
Vaults, okay.
And the protocol, it automatically shifts those assets around to different DeFi platforms.
Okay, so it's like a robo-advisor for crypto.
Exactly, yeah, that's a good analogy.
Okay.
And the goal is to maximize returns.
So it's like having a robot manage your crypto portfolio.
It is, yeah, and Fraunhofer FIT and CryptoSlate, they've both written about this.
Okay, so it's a growing trend.
It is, yeah, it's one of the more popular areas of DeFi.
And Fraunhofer FET, they even mentioned some other really cool applications, right?
They did, yeah. They talked about decentralized lotteries.
Decentralized lotteries. Okay.
Yeah, so these are lotteries that are provably fair.
So there's no way for anyone to rig the system.
Exactly. It's all transparent and auditable.
Okay, that's pretty neat.
And they also talked about insurance against smart contract exploits.
Okay, so if your smart contract gets hacked, you can get compensated.
Exactly, yeah. It's like insurance for the DeFi world.
And then they mentioned prediction markets.
Prediction markets, yeah. Those are platforms where you can bet on the outcome of future events.
So it's like betting on the election or betting on the Super Bowl?
It could be, yeah, anything that you can make a prediction about.
Okay.
And then they also talked about decentralized gaming.
Decentralized gaming. Okay, so how does that work?
So in decentralized games, the in-game assets can be tokenized as NFTs.
NFTs, right? Those unique digital assets.
Exactly. And those NFTs, they can have real-world value.
So you can actually buy and sell them.
You can, yeah. And some of these NFTs, they've gone for a lot of money.
Okay, so it's like owning a piece of the game.
It is, yeah, and it's a really interesting development in the gaming world.
So it seems like DeFi is trying to replicate and even reinvent almost every traditional financial service.
It is, yeah. It's like they're taking the financial system and rebuilding it from the ground up.
And it's all happening in this decentralized space.
Exactly, and that's what's so exciting about it.
Okay, so now that we've seen what DeFi is doing, let's think about its potential.
Okay, sounds good.
What are the big promises that it holds?
Well, one of the biggest ones